we're going to make our neckline facing, curved facing. These are all the pieces. So you have two, what we're gonna call fronts and a back, and then three facing pieces, two front facings. They've got interfacing applied, and one back neck facing with interfacing applied. So the first thing we want to do is stay stitch our necklines so they don't get stretched out. And we have to do that with directional stitching, which in this case means I'm going to stitch from the shoulder around to this front opening edge, so that I'm not going against the grain any more than I have to. Stay stitching should be within the seam allowance. So my neckline has a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so I'll be just inside of that. It's a regular stitch length, and I don't need to back stitch. One, my other front, again, from the shoulder around. And this should be done essentially right after it is cut. So my back, also from the shoulder in, which means I have to do it in 2 parts. Now we can join all of our pieces at the shoulder seams. So we will have a curve once it's all finished up, looking something like this. So right sides together, shoulder to shoulder on the bigger pieces. Our shoulder seam is a 1/2 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to set that one aside for a minute. When I bring these guys together, you can see how, like along this top cut edge, the back piece is a little bit shorter than the front. It's fine up there because where we're concerned about them meeting up is right here at the 1/2 of an inch sew line. So that's where I'm looking that edge to edge we should match. And I will stitch directionally on this shoulder from neckline out. Oops, I just unthreaded my needle. So I'll stitch my shoulder seam at a 1/2 of an inch. And now I'll back stitch because this is just a regular plain seam. While we're sitting here, we can do the same thing for our facings. Join them at the shoulders. They too will end up like this. So here's our neckline curve. So
right sides together, and they have the difference, just like the others, have that shoulder shape.
then we'll go and press all these seams open.
Facings don't require the stay stitching along the neckline. They've got the interfacing that kind of helps a little bit.
So we'll go right sides together along this neck curve, and we'll turn this corner and go down. So we should be matching all of our shoulder seams up. And as I sew, I want to make sure my seam allowances stay pressed open there. So at this point, I could ignore the directional and just go up and around. Or there are times when I still find it beneficial to kind of come from the center and around. So maybe I'll do that today. So 1/4 inch seam allowance, and making sure everything's pressed open there. Working around that tight spot at the shoulder. Now when we get to this outward corner, we could just hit the spot and pivot, or some people like to do on outward corners like 1 stitch bevel. So I'll do the first way, just pivot, and then on my other corner I'll bevel. You can see a difference perhaps, or see if there is any difference. So stop, pivot, continue at 1/4 inch. And then I'll pick up at the center again and overlap those stitches just a little bit.
Matching shoulders, staying open, yes.
And so now I want to, looks like I'm just a smidge big there, but instead of doing the full pivot, I'm going to like bisect that angle, I guess, maybe, and then go like this. It's supposed to be 1/4 inch. I have a little facing sticking off there. So if we look at it from the side with the black stitching, hopefully you see that one angled stitch versus this one's just so. And we clip. This is a concave curve, so it would appreciate some snips. We're not removing any fabric. And then our corners, sometimes they need to be trimmed. You could think of them as a large convex curve, I guess. So sometimes people will kind of chop off a good bit of the seam allowance there, but I always try to turn them first without. So if I kind of fold stuff together with my hand and do that, and then maybe with a point turner, it'll look okay. With lighter weight fabrics, you can often get away without clipping them, but sometimes heavier weight fabrics get too bulky inside of there. But I think they'll be okay without a clip. Okay, so which side was this? This was the unbeveled. Yeah. Let's go press. Okay, so we want to press all these seams towards the facing. And we're going to end up understitching to keep the seam allowance over there. It'll keep it from rolling out. So it's easy enough on the straight parts. The curved parts, you have to work a little more bit by bit here. Pressing that seam over there towards the facing. And a little more. So if we look at these two guys, I can't really tell a difference. So just something to keep in mind and maybe test out on a sample of fabric if you're needing a nice corner, especially like on a collar point or something.